Hello, I'm Rebecca Jones and welcome to the Bloomberg Australia Podcast, broadcasting live from Bloomberg's headquarters in Sydney in front of a group of my favourite people, our subscribers. And I want to ask you first, how was your Saturday? Get up to much? Anthony Albanese, he's back and the pollsters got it right, which if history is any guide, it isn't always a guarantee. Scott Morrison, I'm looking at you. In 2022, Albo rode in on a horse named Climate with a mandate for a referendum to give Australia's First Nations people more say in government policy. But in 2025, it has been a remarkably different campaign. In any case, what he did worked, and he's going to spend the next 3 years winching the nation out of a cost of living and housing crisis that has dominated much of his first term. Albanese also takes on the role at arguably one of the most contentious times in geopolitics. If you were experiencing over the weekend a sense of deja vu when we had the result on Saturday night, that is because we've had similar results in Canada, with both ruling parties, both here and there, experiencing what can only be described as a stunning turnaround in the last couple of months that eventually led to wins for both incumbents. It's no secret that the US President Donald Trump has loomed large over both polls. So today we ask, what challenges face a newly emboldened Anthony Albanese, and how will he tackle those at home and also abroad? I'm delighted to introduce my panel today of experts. Yanping Li is Bloomberg's Beijing bureau chief. James McIntyre is a Bloomberg economist covering Australia and New Zealand. Swati Pandey is an Asia-Pacific economics correspondent for Bloomberg, and if you've ever been anywhere near an RBA press conference in the last 10 years, you would know her well. Finally, we have Derek Wallbank. Derek is a veteran Washington correspondent who's covered Trump closely ever since he descended his golden escalator back in 2015 to announce his presidential run. Welcome to my panel. Team, we are now firmly in the era of Albanese, and it hasn't been since John Howard back in the 90s that we've had a leader that's owned the country quite like Albanese. Let's set the scene. I'll start with you, James. If you were going to make a movie about the 2025 Australian election, who would you have play Anthony Albanese and why?
Okay, all right. I think I'm going to go with Christian Bale. Now, no, not American Psycho. And although
the Machinist.
Yeah, the Machinist. Although he's very keen on hunting down Tories, I'm not thinking Batman, the Cape Crusader. Instead, I'm thinking of Vice, where Christian Bale transformed himself into Dick Cheney, the vice president to George W. Bush, because of Albo's transformations over time. Now, we've seen Albanese for a long time in public life. He started out in student politics, very, very, left-wing activism, came into the parliament. We saw him through the Gillard administration, very timid and perhaps disappointing for some of those people during his first term, for some of those people expecting some of that, that real might and fight coming through. But this time around, I think we might be in for another evolution. With a majority in Parliament, we might be able to see Albo unleashed. And so I think Christian Bale might be able to spread that full range of Albo and the next iteration.
You always over-deliver. I asked for a movie actor and you've given me his album title, Albo Unleashed. I love it. Swati Pandey, same question to you.
Beck, I'm Indian-Australian, so I'm entitled to two answers. One is Indian Bollywood star who is Pankaj Tripathi. He comes from a very modest background like Albanese and has made it big like Albanese. And he's played some really wonderful characters. So that would be my first pick. My Australian pick would be Hugo Weavings. He has shown, like James just mentioned, chameleon-like adaptability in his various movies that he's done. And Albanese has shown similar adaptability during his political career. So that's my second pick.
Yanping Li, dazzle me with your knowledge of Hollywood actors.
Thanks, Beck. It's great to be in Sydney. I will go with a Hollywood pick, Paul Giamatti. I think he's good at acting for complex characters. If we are talking about Mr. Albanese's wit, political shrewdness, and how he developed his career, as our colleagues have mentioned here. But also he has played a political figure before, notably John Adams, one of the founding fathers for America that led the country through turbulent times. We are now not at a war right now, but we are facing a trade war between the world's two biggest economies, so really global turmoil that Australia and Albanese is facing.
Derek Wallbank, you were with us, the Sydney Bureau, on Saturday night when Albanese seized his second term. Who's your pick to play him in the movie?
Okay, so I'm not going to stretch this analogy too far, but I would say Robert Downey Jr. And I don't think that Albo will mind me comparing him to Iron Man. But they both have a bit of a started from the bottom, now we're here kind of effect. 18 months ago, Albanese is reeling from a referendum he called that could not have gone politically worse for him. Where he stands now with a historic win after that, it really sort of, there is an arc to this sort of comeback that he has made. And it puts him in this rare air position going forward that I think a lot of people in the world are going to be looking to him to sort of chart their own paths forward.
Very thoughtful. And look, I'm not sure if your answers reveal more about your Netflix clues than Albanese's actual public image. But look, it's fascinating all the same. Let's get into it. Swati, I will start with you. Albanese has faced increased pressures to deliver policies that are able to revive Australia's flagging growth engines. We know in the last couple of years, Australia has fared worse than our global peers. What are the big challenges he's facing right out of the gate here at home?
In many ways, it looks like Albanese's second term is going to be more challenging. When he started his first term, the biggest challenge for him was inflation, fighting inflation, cost of living crisis, and everything else that ensued as a result of that. Inflation has cooled, so that's the rate of increase in prices, but prices are still up. So you're still paying very high rents. You're still paying a lot of money to buy a house. Public transport is expensive, and there are those living pressures in the economy. At the same time, wages have not increased at the same pace, so people feel like they have gone backwards, and that is the number one challenge that Albanese needs to address. The number two challenge is a corollary of that, which is housing. We have not built enough housing to meet the growing demand, the growing population. And most of the policies so far have addressed the demand side of problems. So boosted demand further rather than addressing the supply side of the problem. So policies are further fueling prices rather than addressing supply. So these are the two major domestic issues that he needs to address. And this is in the backdrop of a worsening budget position where we are seeing structural deficits and there is no solution that the government has offered on that front so far.
I'll bring you in now, James McIntyre. How likely is it that this expanded majority that Albanese has gathered on Saturday is going to translate into immediate or soon to happen economic reform? And when reforms do come, what is he likely to prioritise first?
Yeah, well, I think if we look the swing in the parliament towards that majority, it means that there's less attention that the government needs to pay in the House, at least, to some of those stronger voices of reform. Whether you like them or not, the Teals, those independents backed by the climate group, ended up being a very powerful force for arguing for a lot of different reforms through the course of the last parliament. They'll still be there, but whether the government needs to listen to them as closely this time around, there's a little bit less of a pressure there. I think we also need to kind of think about what is reform. What are we calling reform? Because the government's policies to provide extra health funding, to boost or change the economic incentives for GPs to make free healthcare, GP visits free under Medicare, you could call that a reform. Or the small changes to tax rates. They will boost productivity, and taking that 16% tax rate down to 14% over a couple of years. They will boost participation, I should say. That could be argued to be a reform as well, but they're not any of the big reforms. It's not like that the government is going to, and we saw the opposition walk away from this in the campaign, going to do things like index tax scales for bracket creep, or do things like look to broaden the base of the GST and take some pressure off income and company taxes, or touch resource rent taxes. So I think that we're really going to see the government focusing in on those bread and butter cost of living things, talking about how they're small reforms, but some of those bigger ones might be still left on the side of the road.
Can I add just one more point to what James just mentioned? We heard during Albanese's victory speech, he mentioned climate transition, and I think there is an opportunity there as well. We have not done a lot on climate transition, energy transition so far, and that's probably because the focus of the first term Albanese government was inflation and cost of living. So that is one area as well where we can boost productivity.
That's what's happening at home. Let's go further afield. To you, Derek Wallbank, what readout do you take of the Trump effect in Saturday's election, and also more recently in Singapore and in Canada?
Well, so I think you have 3 elections over the last week, right? And 3 kind of makes a trend. And across all of those, on the winning side, I think you saw a flight to safety. I think whenever you're talking about in investing or politics, it works the same way. In times of turbulence, you look for havens. And the 3 parties that won were seen as a safer place to be, a safer person to be with, a safer team to lead. That certainly was the case in Canada. That certainly was the case in Singapore. I think it was the case here as well, although here there would have been a lot of other things at play. Let's flip the card a little bit, though, because if you really want to see a lot of that Trump effect, you have to look on the backside of it as well. 2024 in November, a lot of conservative-leaning parties around the world are looking at Donald Trump, looking at the campaign he ran, and taking lessons, right? Some of that is on policy. A lot of it is on politics. And I make a distinction between those 2 things. And on the politics side, you're talking presentation, you're talking messaging, you're talking like the very basics of how you communicate, right? And there's a lot of lessons being taken there. But a sort of funny thing happened on the way to these elections, which was when Trump came in, and particularly with the tariff effect, and extra particularly when you're talking about some of those events like the Oval Office showdown with Zelensky, when you're talking about the quote unquote Liberation Day tariffs, things like that. There really was a backlash to that. And you saw here with Peter Dutton having to fend off claims that essentially he was the Coke Zero of Donald Trump for the entire campaign. You had the exact same thing in Canada where Pierre Poilievre adopted literally a slogan that was called Canada First. No points for guessing where he got that from, and then really struggled to distance himself from Trump going forward. And so that really did have an effect. And when they sort of met the voters, it was under a different circumstance than maybe when they were initially starting that framing. And so those would be 2 places where I'd really look for a specific political Trump effect.
Let's have a look at the other side of that coin and waiting very patiently after taking a red eye to be here today for this live taping. Yanping Yi, what does Beijing make of Albanese's win on Saturday?
Hi, Beck. I think This election result is a welcoming news for China because it means consistency in terms of policy and approach dealing with China. Let's take a step back. If you're looking at China and U.S., where the relationship is mired at the moment, the biggest complaints coming from the Chinese side is inconsistency and flip-flopping by President Trump and the lack of mutual understanding between the two sides. By comparison, I think Mr. Albanese has, in his first term, has managed to amend relationship with China and bring back to China some of Australia's key products like wine and lobster and barley. So for that matter, to China, this diplomacy is working, and China would like to see that continuing going forward, especially at a time when China wants to gain more support from non-U.S. major trading partners to rally support against U.S. pressure and what it called a unilateral bullying against the world. The second point I want to mention here is also this is a win in terms of public opinion, exactly for what Derek just mentioned for China. I want to mention a good example of that is shortly after the election result was announced on Sunday morning, Hu Xijing, the former editor-in-chief for Global Times, one of Chinese state media that's been very vocal during the first trade war, came out with a quick commentary that stopped, again, Trump has lost Australia. So I think that is a reflection of the public sentiments in China in terms of people around the world is getting increasingly worried of President Trump's policy agenda.
As you mentioned, the relationship between Australia and China, it hasn't been all beer and skittles in the last couple of years, but it is fair to say that, both Albanese and his Foreign Minister Penny Wong have taken these steps in recent times to repair that relationship. I'll bring you in here now, James McIntyre, from an economic view, given what's happened with this tariff war that it's going on right now. Has this changed the way Australia needs China?
Okay, thanks, Beck. So I think if we think about the trade war with China that happened through the COVID era, there were some casualties for sure for the wine sector, for lobbyists in particular. But otherwise, it looks like a spectacular win for Australia in terms of exporting more and getting paid more for it, including increasing our exports to China through that period. So, it didn't really matter what China did in that little trade spat with us. But I think it matters more what China does now. It also matters more what Tokyo and Japan do now as well. Both are under the gun. China obviously more for the Trump administration, and there will be significant impacts on their economy from the trade war, from those tariffs. Whether that spills over to us, our modelling, we've got an excellent trade modelling team that's done across the world analysis. And when we look at the results for Australia, we find that the biggest impact on Australia from the trade war, it's a small impact, but the biggest impact is not direct. It's not about our tariffs with the US. It's the indirect. It's about the US, the effect of the US's tariffs on everyone. So it matters more for us what Beijing does in terms of stimulating and supporting and pivoting its own economy as it responds to the damage from the Trump administration.
I want to stick with tariffs here now. To you, Derek Wallbank, Donald Trump, he talks a lot, but he doesn't always do what he's threatening to do. There has been a question around Trump about whether people should take him seriously or indeed literally. How do you approach that?
I start by saying yes to that question, right? I think you do have to take Trump at his word initially, but you also have to recognize that there's a bit of an arbitrage between what he will issue as his most maximal threat and what winds up actually happening. At the same time, recognize that it's very rarely nothing at all, right? So he tends to land somewhere in the middle. Now, how do you sort of approach that? There's a lot of volatility in there. And one thing I would find with Trump is that, and you can go back to reading his book, The Art of the Deal, which he put out in the 1980s. And you'll see references to this, but Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, made a reference to it the other day. Trump is very comfortable with uncertainty. He is much more comfortable with uncertainty than you are. He's certainly much more comfortable with uncertainty than most major governments are, most businesses are. So that's point the first. Point the second, I would say, is that I always look at the paperwork. So the White House puts out how it's going to do what it says it's going to do. They have a big section on the website about executive actions and all of that other stuff. I go there and I read the plain text. And some of the stuff that he says he's going to do is, I'm going to do this, it starts tomorrow, and there we go. And some of it is, I'm going to do this. But what its actual execution is this official over here has 270 days to give me a report, and once I receive that report, we'll figure out and go on from there. And all of that, whenever you see the word delay, all of that, read that as negotiating window, right? All of that is window for negotiation. We've seen this with the Liberation Day tariffs, right? Those got put in. There was a big reaction from markets, but particularly the bond market. Trump is very sensitive to markets. He watches them. If he says that he's watching them, if he's not, he's watching them. He's very aware of what's happening there. This is a guy throughout his first term who would constantly say, you may like what I'm doing, you may not like what I'm doing, but watch your 401k, your American retirement plan. Watch your retirement plan, and you should be happy. He can't really say that right now in his second term. So you're seeing an adjustment there. This is a White House that has said short-term pain for long-term gain. And the last point I'll make really quickly is time-wise, you are in a point where Trump can make some of those short-term pain things. The next election is November 2026. As we are starting to move toward that election, you may see a little bit more in the way of market sensitivity and really wanting to make sure that the U.S. economy and the views of how everything is going are on that upswing. So you are in that sort of period where you can offer that sort of pain now, gain later.
Finally, to you, Swati, what does Albanese's track record tell us about how he'll handle this unpredictable drumbeat coming out of the White House? Is he as comfortable riding a roller coaster blindfolded as if you would believe Derek Wallbank? Donald Trump's very comfortable in that situation.
What we have seen of Albanese so far is that his style seems to be of strategic alignment, quiet pragmatism. He's very diplomatic. We are seeing some sort of bromance happening with Donald Trump as well. Their relationship is pretty strong in Donald Trump's own words. We have seen that phone call that has happened. Donald Trump has earned the praise, Albanese has earned the praise of Donald Trump, which is a rare feat in the global order. So whatever Albanese is doing is working, and he should probably continue that and make sure that we are on the winning side of tariffs.
I'll bring it back to the entire panel now, quickly. Just 3 words. I'll start with you, James McIntyre. 3 words of advice for Anthony Albanese as he approaches his second term. Go.
I'm going to steal 3 words from former Treasury Secretary Ken Henry. Go early, go hard, go households. I think Albo needs to go early, use those negotiating windows with Trump, go hard, push it to the US. They need us as much as we need them, and go housing. Housing is a big challenge. It's going to take a while to turn it around, especially when you need to unlock housing supply.
Swati Pandey, same question.
Albanese is a Swiftie, and so am I. So I'm going to say, shake it off.
Derek Wallbank, 3 words to describe how we think he should be approaching Donald Trump in the next 100 days. 3 words.
I would say keep it up, all right? He's just run a contrast campaign against, as I said, somebody who was standing in as a proxy for Trump in the campaign and came out of it with Trump saying that they have a great relationship and go forward. So I think on that, he's playing Trump reasonably well. At the same time, he's going to get asked by a lot of people to become a global example of how to deal with Trump, and there be dragons.
Yanping Li, your 3 words of advice for Anthony Albanese.
This might sound a bit cliche as compared to all the keywords that my colleagues do, but I would say stay composed, constructive and communicative exactly for all the noises that we're hearing around almost every morning we wake up. And that China might come out again with strong but opaque languages. So I think these 3 words hopefully will help leaders like Albanese to navigate that situation and clear air with key trading partners.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. A huge thank you to my esteemed panel, James McIntyre, Swati Pandey, Yanping Ying, and Derek Wallbank. Let's give them a round of applause. And I continue that thanks to all of you. There is genuinely nothing more than a bunch of journalists and economists enjoy than talking to people about news. I'd also like to thank you for subscribing to the Bloomberg Australia podcast. And if you haven't already done so, you can find us on every podcast platform. Thank you, and we'll see you all again next week.